A crisp autumn evening settled over Los Angeles as Keanu Reeves stepped into the grand lobby of the exclusive Montclair boutique hotel. His dark blazer draped over his lean frame, and his well-worn jeans hinted at a man who valued simplicity over extravagance. His signature shoulder-length hair framed a face known worldwide, yet tonight, no one seemed to recognize him. The Montclair wasn't just any hotel. It was Keanu's quiet passion project, a place he had envisioned as a haven for guests of all backgrounds. Despite its luxury, he had always wanted it to be a place of warmth and kindness, where people were treated with dignity, regardless of their status. However, tonight, that vision would be tested in a way he never expected. At the front desk, Amanda, the receptionist, barely spared him a glance as she tapped away on her keyboard. With her perfectly pressed uniform and air of superiority, she embodied the hotel's elite atmosphere. Keanu approached with a polite nod. "Good evening. I have a reservation under the name Reeves." Amanda's eyes flicked up momentarily, and in that brief moment, a look of judgment flashed across her face. She leaned forward slightly, as if assessing whether he truly belonged. "Are you sure, sir?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. Keanu remained patient, nodding. "Yes, I have the confirmation email right here." He retrieved his phone, scrolling to show the reservation. Amanda barely glanced at it before scoffing under her breath. "We don't usually have last-minute walk-ins." Her voice grew louder, ensuring those in the lobby overheard. "This is an exclusive establishment, not a roadside motel." Amanda and David, a young couple celebrating their anniversary, exchanged nervous glances. They recognized him. Who wouldn't? But they remained quiet, watching in disbelief as the receptionist continued to humiliate one of the most respected actors in Hollywood. "I assure you, my reservation was made well in advance," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. Amanda rolled her eyes dramatically. "Look, we cater to real VIP guests, celebrities, CEOs, people who can actually afford to stay here. You might want to try somewhere else." She gave him a pointed stare, her meaning clear. Keanu's face remained unreadable, but something in his gaze flickered, a hint of hurt mixed with quiet amusement. It wasn't the first time he had been underestimated. He had been through enough in life to know that arrogance was often just a mask for insecurity. Just as Amanda reached for the phone, presumably to call security, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Amanda!" came the sharp tone of James, the hotel's general manager, as he hurried across the marble floor. The moment his eyes landed on Keanu, his face drained of color. "Sir," James said breathlessly, I apologize for this misunderstanding." Amanda blinked, confused. "What do you mean? I was just handling—" James turned to her, his voice barely a whisper but carrying a weight of panic. "That's Mr. Reeves. He owns this hotel." A heavy silence settled over the room. A stunned gasp came from Emily, and even David, usually the skeptic, widened his eyes in realization. Amanda's confident posture crumbled, her lips parted in shock, her eyes darting from James to Keanu, hoping this was some cruel joke. Keanu, still composed, offered a small, knowing smile. "I was just curious to see how guests were treated here," he said simply. Amanda stumbled over her words. "Mr. Reeves, I had no idea." "That much is clear," he said gently, his tone lacking malice but carrying an undeniable weight. Amanda's knees nearly buckled beneath her as she felt the eyes of the entire lobby on her. She had just humiliated the owner of the very place she prided herself on representing. Shame surged through her, but what scared her most was the uncertainty of what would happen next. Would she be fired on the spot? Keanu looked around at the guests who had witnessed the incident, then back at Amanda. He exhaled deeply before saying, "I believe in kindness. It's the foundation of everything I built here." His voice was soft, but it carried through the space like a commandment. Amanda swallowed hard, her pride crumbling as tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." Keanu studied her for a moment before replying. "Words are easy. Actions matter more." The weight of his words settled over her like a stone. James, still watching anxiously, stepped forward. "Sir, I take full responsibility for this. This is not the experience we want for our guests." Keanu turned to him with a small nod. Then let's make sure it never happens again. As Amanda struggled to process what had just occurred, the door to the lobby opened and a small boy, no older than 8, entered with his mother. The boy clutched something in his hands as he hesitantly approached Keanu. "Mr. Reeves?" The child's voice trembled. Keanu knelt down, offering a warm smile. "Hey there, buddy." The boy slowly opened his hand, revealing a folded piece of paper. "My dad used to watch your movies with me before he went to heaven. He always said you were the nicest person in Hollywood." Keanu's throat tightened as he carefully unfolded the paper. It was a simple drawing of a superhero, and scrawled at the top in a child's handwriting were the words, "To Mr. Reeves." The real superhero. The room fell silent. Amanda's breath hitched, witnessing the raw, unguarded moment. Tears glistened in Keanu's eyes as he gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your dad must have been an amazing person." The boy nodded fiercely. "He was, and he was right about you." Emily wiped her tears, clinging to David's hand. "It's incredible," she whispered, "how someone who has lost so much still chooses to be kind." David squeezed her hand. "That's what makes him different." Amanda, standing frozen, felt something shift inside her. Keanu had every right to humiliate her in return, to have her fired, to make her feel the way she had made him feel. But he hadn't. Instead, he had chosen to remind her what kindness truly meant. She had spent years chasing an illusion of prestige, convinced that exclusivity and wealth equated to success. But standing in front of the man she had misjudged, Amanda realized how hollow that belief truly was. For the first time in a long time, she wanted to be better. Keanu stood, glancing around the lobby once more before turning back to James. "I'm going to my room," he said, his voice steady. "Let's talk tomorrow about some changes we need to make." James nodded fervently. "Of course, sir." As Keanu walked toward the elevator, he paused and turned to Amanda. "You'll get another chance," he said. "Don't waste it." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, whispering, "I won't." And as the elevator doors closed behind Keanu, Amanda made a silent vow. She would prove to him, and to herself, that she was capable of more than judgment and arrogance. She would become the kind of person he believed in. Amanda stood frozen at the reception desk long after Keanu disappeared into the elevator. Her body felt like it was made of stone, her breath shallow. The weight of humiliation and regret pressed down on her, heavier than any burden she had ever carried. She had spent years perfecting the art of appearing untouchable, of exuding power through a cold exterior. But in a matter of minutes, Keanu Reeves had unraveled her. And not through anger, not through punishment, but through kindness. The very thing she had forgotten how to offer. Behind her, James exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Amanda," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "Go home, get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." Amanda nodded stiffly, her face pale. I'll stay a little longer," she murmured. "I need to clear my head." James studied her for a moment before nodding and stepping away. Across the lobby, Emily and David still sat by the fireplace, their hands intertwined. They had come to the hotel for romance, for a peaceful getaway, but they were leaving with a story that had changed their perspective on life. "I can't believe that just happened," David muttered, running a hand through his hair. Emily wiped the last of her tears. "I always heard stories about Keanu, but seeing it in person, he really is as good as people say." David leaned forward, his voice thoughtful. "You know what gets me? He could have embarrassed her. He could have fired her on the spot. But instead, he gave her a chance to be better." Emily nodded, her gaze shifting to Amanda, who stood at the desk, visibly shaken. "She needed that," Emily said softly. "Sometimes, people need to be reminded of what really matters." David kissed her temple. "And sometimes, people need to meet the right person to remind them." The lobby slowly returned to normal. Guests came and went, conversations resumed. But the weight of what had just occurred lingered like an unspoken presence in the air. Keanu stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city stretching endlessly before him. The faint hum of distant traffic filled the quiet space. And yet, his thoughts were elsewhere. The boy's drawing still rested on the desk beside him, the real superhero. He let out a deep breath, rubbing the back of his neck. People always saw the hero, they never saw the man. The one who had spent nights sleeping on a friend's couch because he had nowhere else to go. The one who had lost the love of his life and their unborn child. The one who still felt the ghost of his best friend's laughter in the wind. And yet, the boy had looked at him with such belief, such unwavering certainty, as if he truly were invincible. Keanu picked up the drawing, studying the uneven pencil strokes, the careful but imperfect handwriting. He thought of the boy's father, gone. But his legacy had lived on, in his son's unwavering belief in kindness. Keanu swallowed hard and sat down, his fingers lightly tapping against the wooden desk. His phone buzzed beside him. He glanced at the screen, a message from his sister. "Saw the news about your hotel. Another Keanu Reeves moment, huh? Proud of you, big brother." A faint smile played on his lips. His sister had been through so much. Her battle with leukemia had nearly broken them both. But she was here, still fighting, still strong. Keanu typed a quick response. "Just doing my best. Love you." Then his eyes flickered back to the drawing, and an idea struck him. Amanda sat in the dimly lit room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The coffee in front of her had gone cold. She hadn't touched it. Her heart was still hammering in her chest. She had spent years working her way up the hospitality ladder, proving herself in a world that valued exclusivity over compassion. And yet, all it took was one moment to unravel everything. She had seen kindness before, but she had never been on the receiving end of it after being so undeserving. She had been rude, condescending. She had made him feel small, and he had lifted her up instead. What kind of man does that? Her mind drifted to the little boy from earlier, the way he had looked at Keanu, the sheer admiration in his eyes. That wasn't admiration built on fame, that was admiration built on character. And Amanda suddenly felt ashamed of who she had become. She wasn't always like this. She used to care. She used to love people. But somewhere along the way, she had learned that kindness didn't get you anywhere. It didn't earn promotions. It didn't gain respect. And yet, Keanu Reeves had just proven that wrong. She inhaled sharply and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed out a message to her mother. "Mom, I know it's been a while, but I just wanted to say, I miss you, and I'm sorry for being distant." She hesitated before hitting send. But then, she did. A soft breath escaped her lips, and for the first time in a long time, she felt lighter. Keanu was up early. He had never been one for sleeping in. His mind was always restless, always moving. Dressed in a casual black sweater and jeans, he made his way to the lobby, where the morning rush had already begun. Amanda was at the front desk, her posture a little different today, softer. She glanced up and met his eyes. And instead of looking away in shame, she held his gaze. "Mr. Reeves," she started, her voice steadier than she expected. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you said last night, for not giving up on me when you had every reason to." Keanu studied her for a moment before nodding. "I'm not interested in apologies," he said simply. "I'm interested in change." Amanda nodded, straightening her shoulders. "Then I hope you'll see that in me." A small smile tugged at Keanu's lips. "I already do." At that moment, the front doors swung open, and the little boy from the night before came running in, his mother just a step behind him. Keanu turned just in time to catch the boy's excited voice. "Mr. Reeves!" Keanu grinned and knelt down to meet him. "Hey there, buddy." The boy held up the envelope Keanu had left for him at the front desk. "I got your note." His smile was so wide it could have brightened the entire city. Keanu ruffled his hair gently. "Good. I meant every word." The boy's mother wiped a tear from her eye. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves, for everything." Keanu shook his head. "No, thank you. Your son reminded me of something important." The boy tilted his head. "What's that?" Keanu smiled, his voice soft but certain. "That kindness is the only real superpower there is." As Keanu stepped outside into the crisp morning air, The city hummed around him, alive and unbothered by the quiet revolutions taking place within the walls of the Montclair Hotel. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to James. "Tell Amanda she's getting promoted to head of guest relations. Let's make sure kindness is the new standard around here." A moment later, James replied, "Already ahead of you, boss." Keanu chuckled softly, slipping his phone back into his pocket. And as he walked down the bustling street, blending into the world like just another face in the crowd, the weight in his chest didn't feel as heavy. Because somewhere in this vast, complicated world, one small act of kindness had started a ripple, and that, he knew, would be enough. Keanu walked down the quiet Los Angeles street, his hands tucked into his pockets, the boy's drawing safely folded inside his jacket. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it the distant sounds of the city waking up. He had planned to leave the hotel discreetly, but something tugged at him, an unresolved feeling lingering in his chest. He wasn't done here. Instead of heading toward his car, he turned and walked back toward the Montclair Hotel. But this time, instead of entering through the grand lobby, he made his way to the employee entrance. As he pushed open the door, several staff members turned in surprise. The break room fell silent as Keanu stepped inside, offering a small nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said with an easy smile. James, who had been refilling his coffee, nearly dropped the mug. "Sir? What brings you down here?" Keanu scanned the room, noting the mix of surprise, awe, and confusion on the employees' faces. He had spent years ensuring this hotel operated as more than just a business. It was a home for those who worked here. But how well did he really know the people running it? "I realized something last night," Keanu said, leaning against the doorway. "I built this place to be different, but the truth is, I haven't been around enough to make sure that's happening. I want to change that." James nodded, but the other employees still looked hesitant. "So, if you all don't mind, I'd like to spend the day shadowing each of you," Keanu continued, grinning. "I want to see the hotel through your eyes." A stunned silence followed. Then one of the kitchen staff, Maria, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and flour-dusted hands, spoke up. "Wait, you want to work with us?" Keanu shrugged. "Why not? Got an apron to spare?" The room erupted into laughter, the tension melting away. Keanu spent the morning in the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves and assisting the staff with meal prep. He learned how Maria had been working at the Montclair for over 10 years, supporting her 2 children through college. "We hear about the celebrities that come through here," she said, kneading dough with practiced hands. "But we don't see the faces behind the hotel." "Until today," Keanu smiled. "Guess I've been hiding too long." After a few hours in the kitchen, Keanu moved to the housekeeping department. He worked alongside Terrence, a Vietnam War veteran who took pride in ensuring every guest had a pristine room. "Most people don't see what we do," Terrence admitted as he straightened the sheets. "They only notice when something's wrong." Keanu nodded. But without you, this place wouldn't run," Terrence chuckled. "Good to hear that from the boss himself." In the afternoon, Keanu returned to the front desk. This time, not as a guest, but as a worker. Amanda, who had spent the night reflecting on her mistakes, stiffened when she saw him approach. "Sir, Keanu raised a hand to stop her. "We already had that talk, Amanda. Let's just get to work." She exhaled, nodding. As the hours passed, Amanda watched as Keanu handled difficult guests with patience and understanding. At one point, an elderly woman checked in, her hands trembling as she struggled to find her ID. "Take your time," Keanu said softly, offering her a reassuring smile. Amanda observed the moment, feeling something shift within her. She had spent years prioritizing efficiency over humanity, but Keanu was showing her a different way. By the end of the shift, Amanda finally understood. Kindness wasn't just about grand gestures. It was about the small moments, the ones no one else saw. As the day wound down, Keanu made his way back to the break room, feeling more connected to his own hotel than he had in years. Just as he was about to leave, Maria hesitated before approaching him. "Sir, there's something I need to ask," she said, wringing her hands. Keanu turned to her. "Of course, what is it?" She hesitated, then blurted out, It's about the Keanu Fund. Keanu's expression remained neutral, but internally, his heart skipped a beat. So, they had found out. For years, Keanu had been secretly contributing a portion of the hotel's profits into a private fund. It was meant to assist employees who were struggling, whether it was unexpected medical bills, tuition fees, or rent assistance. No one was supposed to know it was him. "What about it?" he asked carefully. Maria glanced at Terrence, who stepped forward. "We just wanted to say, whoever started that, it saved a lot of us." Maria nodded. "My son got through college because of that fund. Terrence got the treatment he needed. We don't know who's behind it, but..." She paused. "If you ever meet them, tell them thank you." Keanu swallowed hard. He wanted to tell them the truth, but this was never about recognition. Instead, he gave them a small, knowing smile. "I'm sure whoever started it is just happy to help." Maria wiped a tear from her eye. "Well, whoever it is, they changed lives." Keanu exhaled, his heart full. That was enough. As night fell, Keanu finally made his way back to his suite. He sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the horizon. There was one last thing he needed to do. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the boy's drawing. His fingers traced over the words, "To Mr. Reeves, the real superhero." He smiled faintly. Then he took out an envelope and carefully placed the drawing inside, along with a handwritten note. "To the boy who reminded me that heroes don't wear capes. They carry kindness in their hearts. Thank you for showing me what truly matters. Keep being amazing." With Keanu. The next morning, before leaving the hotel, he handed the envelope to the front desk. "Make sure this gets delivered," he said. Amanda, who was working the desk, took the envelope carefully. When she read the name on it, she understood immediately. She met Keanu's gaze, her throat tightening. "You know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think you might actually be a real-life superhero." Keanu chuckled softly. "I think we all have a little hero in us. We just have to choose to use it." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, disappearing into the city once more. And this time, Amanda didn't feel resentment. She felt inspired. As she tucked the envelope into the outgoing mail, she made a silent vow. She would pay it forward. And maybe, just maybe, kindness would keep rippling outward, one act at a time. Days had passed since the incident at the Montclair Boutique Hotel, but the effects lingered like ripples in a still pond. What had begun as an uncomfortable moment of humiliation had transformed into something much deeper, a lesson in humility, kindness, and the unseen impact of our actions. For Keanu, it was just another night in his long journey of quiet generosity. But for those who had been there, it was a turning point. And for Amanda, it was a reckoning. As Keanu walked through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, his hands tucked in his pockets, he reflected on the events of the past few days. It was remarkable how a single moment of misunderstanding had unraveled into something so profound. He had entered the Montclair that night simply as a guest, but he had left with something much more valuable, a renewed belief in the ripple effect of kindness. The boy's latest drawing, now safely tucked inside his jacket, warmed his heart more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just about being seen as a superhero. It was about being reminded that every act of goodness, no matter how small, left a mark on the world. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw an incoming call from an old contact, one he hadn't heard from in years. Curious, he answered. "Hello?" A familiar voice, warm yet hesitant, came through the line. "Keanu, it's me. I know it's been a while, but I heard about what happened at the Montclair, and I wanted to say thank you." Keanu frowned slightly. "Thank me? For what?" The voice on the other end chuckled. "You probably don't remember, but years ago, I was just another struggling artist in Hollywood. I was broke, living out of my car, and you gave me money for food without asking any questions. You told me to hang in there, that things would turn around." Keanu's memory flickered back, searching through the endless faces he had encountered over the years. He didn't remember the exact moment, but the sentiment was all too familiar. He had always tried to help where he could, believing that even a small kindness could change a life. "And?" he asked, intrigued. A deep sigh came through the line. "And you were right. I just got hired as a lead writer for one of the biggest studios in town. My life changed because of that one act. And now, hearing what you did at the hotel, I just thought you should know. The world sees you as a movie star, but for a lot of us, you're something more." Keanu leaned against a nearby street lamp, letting the words sink in. He had never sought out recognition for his gestures, never expected gratitude. He simply did what felt right, what he hoped others would do in return. But tonight, he realized something. Sometimes, the universe found a way to remind you that the good you put out into the world never truly disappeared. It lived on, in the people you helped, in the moments you touched, in the unseen ways that kindness multiplied. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I'm happy for you," he said genuinely. "Keep the cycle going." "I will," the voice promised. "And Keanu? Thanks for being you." As the call ended, Keanu slipped his phone back into his pocket and resumed his walk, the city lights twinkling around him. For all the loss he had endured, for all the hardships he had faced, he still believed in people. And tonight, the world had given him a reason to keep believing. Keanu wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just the owner of a hotel. He was a reminder that even in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving, there was always room for grace, for kindness, for second chances. And as long as he had the ability to give, he would. Because in the end, that was the only thing that truly mattered. Amanda sat in her apartment, staring at the cup of coffee in front of her. The rich aroma filled the air, but she couldn't bring herself to take a sip. Her mind was a whirlwind, replaying everything that had happened at the hotel. Keanu's words had unraveled something inside her. She had spent years convincing herself that power came from control, from maintaining an air of superiority. But Keanu had shown her a different kind of power. The power of grace, of understanding, of lifting others instead of tearing them down, and it had shaken her to her core. Unable to sit still, she reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Amanda?" She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Hi, Mom." A stunned silence followed. Then, a quiet sob. It had been 5 years since she had spoken to her mother. 5 years since their last bitter argument, the one where Amanda had stormed out, determined to prove she didn't need anyone. And yet here she was, needing this more than anything. Amanda's voice trembled. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And I miss you." Her mother's voice broke. "Oh, sweetheart, I've been waiting so long to hear that." Tears slipped down Amanda's cheeks. Keanu had been right. Words were easy. Actions mattered more. And this was her first step toward change. Meanwhile, across the city, Keanu sat in a dimly lit cafe, his mind drifting back to the young boy in his drawing. To Mr. Reeves, the real superhero. It wasn't the first time someone had called him that, but for some reason this time, it had stayed with him. Maybe because he knew what it was like to search for a hero and not find one. As he sipped his black coffee, his phone vibrated. A message from James. "Sir, something interesting came up. You might want to see this." Curious, Keanu replied, "Be there in 30. He paid his bill and stepped into the cool evening air, making his way back to the Montclair. When he arrived, James was waiting for him in the office, an envelope in his hand. "This came in today," James said, handing it over. Keanu furrowed his brows as he pulled out a handwritten note. "Mr. Reeves, you probably don't remember me, but years ago, you changed my life. I was a struggling actor working 2 jobs to pay rent when I ran into you outside a theater. I was exhausted, hungry, ready to give up, but you, without knowing anything about me, bought me a meal and gave me the most unexpected piece of advice. The world doesn't owe you anything, but that doesn't mean you stop giving to it. That night, I decided not to quit. Now, years later, I'm starring in my first major film. I never got to thank you for what you did for me that night. So thank you. I hope I can pass on the kindness you showed me. Grateful stranger." Keanu exhaled slowly, his fingers tracing the edges of the letter. James studied him. "Do you remember who it was?" Keanu shook his head. "Not really." James smiled. "That's the point, isn't it?" Keanu looked up, meeting James's gaze. The smallest moments, the unseen gestures, they mattered more than anyone realized, and kindness, it had a way of finding its way back. The next morning, Amanda arrived at the hotel earlier than usual. She felt different. She had spent so many years trying to build walls around herself that she had forgotten what it felt like to let people in. But today, she was ready to change. She stepped behind the front desk, smoothing her uniform. As the first guests trickled in, she greeted them with genuine warmth. Not just because it was her job, but because she wanted to. She noticed Maria, the kitchen staff member who had shared her story with Keanu, struggling to carry a tray of pastries. Without hesitation, Amanda stepped out from behind the desk and helped her. Ria blinked in surprise. "Thank you, dear." Amanda smiled. "No problem at all." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that afternoon, as she went through the usual check-ins, she spotted Keanu across the lobby. He was talking to James, but his gaze flickered toward her for a brief second, and in that moment, she knew he had noticed the change. She gave a small nod. Keanu returned it. No words were needed. That evening, Keanu was preparing to leave the Montclair for the last time. For now, at least. Leaving the beach early that morning, Keanu picked up Karina and drove for at least 15 hours. As he stepped toward the exit, a familiar voice called out, "Mr. Reeves!" He turned to see the young boy from before, clutching the envelope Keanu had given him. Keanu knelt down. "Hey, buddy, everything all right?" The boy beamed. "I wanted to give you something." He handed Keanu a fresh piece of paper. This time, it was another drawing. But it wasn't just of Keanu. It was of both of them, standing side by side, with matching capes. "Because heroes always need friends," the boy had written at the bottom. Keanu's throat tightened. He carefully folded the drawing, placing it inside his jacket. "You know what, buddy? You're absolutely right." The boy grinned. "Will you come back?" Keanu ruffled his hair. "Count on it." As the boy ran back to his mother, Keanu finally stepped out into the night, a rare warmth filling his chest. The city stretched before him, as vast and unpredictable as ever. But for the first time in a while, he didn't feel like he was wandering aimlessly. He had always known that kindness mattered, but tonight he had seen the truth firsthand. Kindness had a way of coming full circle. And that was a legacy worth leaving behind. Loved this story? Click the next video for more. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest uploads.